Thank you. Mananan Siduis.
Bom dia. Good morning and welcome to the Global Landscapes Forum.
My name is Rosario Perez, and I'm an Indigenous Chamorro woman from the Pacific island of Guam.
My name is Renata Alvarenga, and I'm a climate justice advocate in Brazil. We would like to welcome you all to GLF Bonn 2019, including our online participants. Today and tomorrow, we'll be discussing the important topic of rights in landscapes. Before we proceed with the opening plenary, we have a few important logistical details to share with you. First one is the Wi-Fi network, very important. So the Wi-Fi network is Mevent, that is M-E-V-E-N-T, and the password is thinklandscape.
If you would like to engage with our plenaries by submitting questions or comments online, please visit Slido and enter the event code GLF 2019. Please, share your experiences and your insights from the event via social media using the hashtag GLF 2019 and Think Landscapes, or add them directly to our community chalkboard outside of this room.
Can we check if we have translation?
Yeah.
For Spanish? We'll sort that out really soon. Thank you for feedback.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as we were mentioning, we do have simultaneous translation. You can go to the front of the room to our right and to your left, and you can get your headphones for simultaneous translation. We also do really encourage you to take part in the various activities that are taking place over the next 2 days, such as the Learning Cafe, which is outside in the corridors of the landscape talks, which will take place in this room during lunch break. We also invite you to get engaged with the Speaker's Corner, speed networking, and also the GLF and partner-led workshops today and tomorrow on the first floor. If you do need any help, you can find all of the volunteers. We're wearing the pin saying volunteers, and they can help you as well.
Please listen for announcements regarding the agenda via the PA system. You can also view upcoming sessions on digital signages throughout the venue, or on your print agenda, or on the GLF website. All food and beverages provided at the event are vegetarian. Coffee breaks and lunch will occur in the lobby area.
Please also know that we'll have a wonderful solidarity reception in this room after the final plenary of the day tonight. So please join IPMG and friends for this unique experience.
Now, please help us in welcoming to the stage climate activist and poet Miss Aka Niviana, who will begin this opening plenary with a poem titled "We Are the Future."
They tell you to make a choice, that you better make it right. The world is at your feet, they tell you with a smile. But does that only bring comfort if you think just for a little while? Wars, disasters, death, and destruction. To make a change in this world seems to me to be the only option if we are to prevent this planet from self-destruction. Though we walk this planet with our soulless feelings as our guidance, disconnected from ourselves, from each other, equals violence, equals endless spirals of eradication of our environment, creating self-entitlement, zero spiritual alignment. And not only is the world at our feet, but it's in our hands, and it's our job to make future plans. And will it be eternal division or together we stand? And will there be light at the end of the tunnel? Or will the tunnel crash down, make it all crumble to the ground, making it no longer matter if we're lost or if we're found? Will we all sit down, wait for it to happen? Or will we rise before the waves come smashing, the thunderstorms start flashing? When will reality kick in? When will we realize there's no time for us left to wait for a savior? When will we realize that the savior we're waiting for is us? We are the hope for the future because we are the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aka, for that very inspiring poem. So now, please help us invite the mayor of Bonn, Ashok Sidrahan, to the stage to give the welcoming speech.
Secretary of State Flaxbart, Director General Massey, esteemed participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Bonn. I am very pleased to address the global landscape community as Mayor of Bonn, host to the Global Landscape Forum offices and UN Bonn, UNFCCC, and as President of ICLE, Local Governments for Sustainability. Bonn is proud to be a true hub for sustainability and climate action, uniting key players in United Nations, federal government, academia, business, and civil society. People, topics, and perspectives come together in our city on both global and local scale, leading to collaborative, innovative approaches. Let me start with a question. Why are rights so important? The 2030 agenda says, leave no one behind. This includes equal rights for every citizen of this world. Citizen as in cities. Cities and regions are closest to the people. They have a mandate to secure their citizens' future and to safeguard their rights. As 80% of the world's population will be dwelling in urban areas soon, cities are key to every global strategy. They are drivers for innovative solutions in urban resilience, in smart infrastructure, and in connecting the work streams to a more holistic approach. Urban landscapes are becoming increasingly important as nature-based solutions help tackle many challenges cities meet on a daily basis, starting with the impacts of climate change. ICLE is working with more than 1,750 cities, towns and regions. For all of these, appreciating their landscape and embracing the nature path helps tackle the impacts of global change. ICLE's 5 pathways to a sustainable development shall lead to resilient, climate-adaptive, biodiverse, healthy and inclusive communities. Towards the decade on ecosystem restoration, new cooperation and alliances will evolve with other levels of governance as well as with stakeholders and communities. Next week, June 26th to 28th, ICLE will host the 10th edition of the Resilient Cities Congress series, including a track on nature-based solutions. This will be a good opportunity for cities, regions and experts to discuss and shape inclusive and right-based approaches. Citizens in Bonn started to claim their right of nature last year with guerrilla planting of insect habitats. Bonn is blooming and humming, is now officially supported by the municipality, and citizens are encouraged to become tenants of open spaces or green patrons. Pollination, food, cooling, green corridors, health, water retention, flood protection, landscape has manifold benefits of the cities of today. When the Bonn City Council adopted our first Bonn Sustainability Strategy based on the 2030 agenda, all 6 thematic areas were right-related: mobility, climate and energy, natural resources and environment, labor and economy, social participation and gender equality, as well as global responsibility and one world. Our people own these rights. We cities are their custodians. On the landscape side, we have joined the BioCities network, advancing and promoting organic farming. Landscape is also a cornerstone of our resilience, for example, as a defense line against Rhine or stream flooding, or as a cooling corridors. We manage our parks, green and open spaces to improve our air quality, adapt to climate change, make our cities resilient and contribute to the health of the citizens. With 2/3 of our city territory under natural or landscape conservation, this is an important factor. Climate, nature and land are inseparably connected to each other, to people and rights. The Global Landscape Forum has a vital role in showcasing these links and in stimulating alliances and collaborative action, as have local governments. Therefore, I am counting on the outcomes of the Global Landscape Forum to feed into both the Bonn Climate Talks and into the Resilient Cities Conference. Let me close by thanking the dedicated GLF team in Bonn and to all of you for coming here today. Please accept my best wishes for the success of your conference. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for that wonderful speech. It's our pleasure now to welcome the Director General of CIFOR, Mr. Robert Massey. Please join us on the stage.
Good morning. Good morning. So here we are on the third Global Landscape Forum in Bonn, the first one that we have in summertime. It used to be in winter. And we are seeing the Global Landscape Forum becoming the Global Landscape family, still a GLF. And we are here to look at rights, and the thing is why rights matter. And imagine that you live in a place where your parents, their parents, and their parents' parents lived, and being told one day that this place is not yours, but belongs to a remote government, and that this remote government has granted this place for the next 25 years to a foreign company that will harvest valuable resources or create a protected area and limit your access to the land, or at the extreme will even evict you. Would you like it? Do you believe this is fair? What could you do? And this is what is still happening too often to local and indigenous people. They are facing an uphill struggle to secure and exercise their rights or what they see as their land. And this is not to say that everything done by local and indigenous people is right or proper, but in the end, neither is what is done on their lands. You might ask, why does it matter in the grand scheme of things? I mean, surely decisions taken by government or development agency for the good of the larger number preempt ill-documented local rights and resources of a small number of local indigenous people. This is, of course, for the sake of the greater good. But at least anyone thinks rights is a side issue in the climate crisis and sustainability battle. Consider this. Many of these communities are already making real and measurable progress in sustainably managing large areas of land and forest. There is no substantial evidence telling that when local community have authority over their reforest and land and their rights are recognized, deforestation rates are reduced. Tenure security appears as a necessary condition for resource sustainability, while insecure tenure is linked with deforestation and forest degradation. Consider the 2.1 hectares of the Guatemala Maya Biosphere Reserve, where almost a dozen community forests are managed locally based on standards set out in the Forest Stewardship Council. which user group adopt in return long-term lease rights to forests. Deforestation rates in these forests have been close to zero over the past 14 years, a better rate than even at the core zone of the reserve. This makes sense. With rights, people who live and work in this landscape are able to ensure the lands and forests continue to be productive rather than degraded and exploited. Or look at the community forest in the Indian state of Meghalaya, one of the country's greenest, with 80% of the area in forest entries, 3 times the national average. Government there has demonstrated its confidence in local management by handing over more than 90% of the forest to local communities, and in providing incentives to over 60 village councils to revive and protect some 27,000 hectares of forests. In Nepal, where forest devolution began in the mid-70s, community forest user group provide an important example of how greater tenure security has enabled community-based institutions to improve forest management and build sustainable livelihood at scale. More than 18,000 forest user groups are now managing over 1/3 of Nepal's forest area. Overall, forest cover has increased considerably, and many of these user groups have licensed new kinds of forest-based enterprise, generating jobs and incomes, something they were legally able to do before the devolution of forest rights. About 1/4 of our greenhouse gases emissions are connected with land use, and forests and agriculture are 2 of the most important land use. Therefore, whoever controls the rights of this landscape has a very important part to play in fighting climate change. Importantly, people with rights have the necessary security to invest in resource management practices, new enterprise, as well as housing, education, and health improvement that conserve forests and enhance economic and social well-being. However, despite the multiple benefits and the empirical evidence, land use rights and tenure security are not so easily achieved. Governments are often not interested or just plain opposed to the issue. Indigenous people and local community legally own only 15% of forest worldwide, less, yet their traditional area cover more than 25% of the world land surface, overlapping with 40% of global land-based government-protected area, including ecologically intact landscapes such as boreal and tropical primary forests, savanna, and marshes. Local communities and indigenous people fighting for their rights must often confront vested political interests and the demand of the wealthy and powerful, cattle rancher, mega farmer, major logging and illegal loggers, which often work against local community control of land and forest. Frequently, those communities do not have the resources to fight back and assert their rights. Successfully recognizing and securing forest tenure requires strong evidence-based understanding of the challenge to design strategy to overcome these. As such, discussion will move from reform in land tenure to the challenge in securing indigenous people's rights, to the role of technology in protecting rights, community-led solution and traditional knowledge for sustainable landscape, and to financial tools for community solution. I believe the power of rights to help solve climate change are yet to be fully witnessed, and I look forward to seeing it soon and starting here and now. Thank you very much for the Landscape Forum. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleagues and friend Tony Simons, the co-principal of the C4 ICRAF venture, and he will introduce the panel to come. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks. Well spoken. Thank you, Robert. Good morning, Bonn. Good morning to the 800 people in the room, and good morning to the more than 8,000 people listening online. And those 8,000 people are significant, not only because we couldn't fit them all in this room if they came, but it helps make us much more efficient in getting our messages out. And you're going to see a whole lot of other amazingly creative things with GLF as it goes digital or more digital in the coming period. 800 people in the room, more than 8,000 people online. And from this event, we will reach more than 800,000 on social media. Now, you might think that's a bit of a stretch, but to date, GLF has reached 250 million people through social media. So we're going to start with a video from Alec Baldwin, and then we're going to have an amazing panel. But before we do that, we're going to introduce to you the Slido question. So go to Slido, take your mobile phone out, go to Slido, www.sli.do, and answer this question. What is the key quality, just in one word? Okay, you can have a hyphen in the middle if you want, but one word, of a new style of leadership. What are the characteristics we want to see as a real quality in inspirational leaders? Okay, so put that one word down, and if we manage to do that, for those in the room and those online as well, we hope to present the result to you at the end of this session. And they're starting to come in. And I guarantee you these 7 come from people who are less than 30 years of age already. So we want everyone engaged, so please do that. Okay, as you see that starting to emerge, that single word, is your word there? If not, type it in. But please type it in the breaks in this session, because we want you to listen very attentively to a special message from our celebrity attendant at this thing, which is Alec Baldwin. Do we have the video ready for that?
I'm Alec Baldwin. It's my privilege to again address the Global Landscapes Forum. Through my work with the United Nations on the protection of forests and the rights of indigenous peoples, I understand the enormity of the challenge at hand. Our forests are in acute danger, and the world's 370 million indigenous peoples need the backing of the international community to protect and conserve them. As you well know, indigenous peoples own or live on roughly a quarter of the Earth's land, and that land holds a staggering 80% of the planet's remaining biodiversity. That puts indigenous peoples right on the front lines of the very real and dangerous fight to protect forests. Securing rights to indigenous lands is critical for forests, biodiversity, and climate change. Forests owned by indigenous peoples and local communities increased from 18.3% in 2002 to 24.1% in 2017. That trend is a good start, but it's not enough. That is why I was so glad to see that the Global Landscapes Forum is focusing this year on the theme of land rights. I heard firsthand of this year's UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues about the growing threats facing forest defenders and indigenous peoples. Whether in Brazil, Peru, Indonesia, the Congo Basin, or other rainforest countries, forest defenders are putting their lives on the line every day to protect our planet. In return, they are being met with violence, intimidation, and murder. Securing land rights for these communities should be a clear and urgent international priority. Study after study shows that when indigenous peoples have legal and physical protection, so do forests. I have been encouraged to see that the Global Landscapes Forum continues to grow into a powerful force for change and to take aim at the issues that matter most for our planet. Through the Global Landscapes Forum, we learn, work, and act together, united in a common cause to protect rights, protect forests, restore landscapes, and fight back against climate change. I wish you success with your discussions and hope that your time together produces new momentum and responses to the land rights issue.
Fantastic celebrity endorsement, fantastic leadership. But we have 5 visionary, amazingly inspirational leaders with us here today to kick off our first plenary panel. So I'd like to invite to the stage Maria Flashbach. Please come and join us on the stage. Cornelia Richter, please come and join us. Jennifer Morris. Desmond Alumina. And Victoria Tauli Corpus. If you could take the second seat. Take the second seat. If you take the third seat, thanks, and the fourth. Ladies and gentlemen, GLF would not happen without Germany, without the Ministry for Economic Development, and without the Ministry for Environment and Biodiversity, and without the city of Bonn. And we are tremendously grateful to them. And this important GLF event is justifiably focused on rights. And we have a wonderful plenary panel here of 5 distinguished and inspirational leaders to kick off this event in real style. You'll hear from our inspirational leaders about land rights, rights of association, rights of freedom, political rights, economic rights, and resource access rights. Now, when we think of rights from a landscape perspective, we all largely have a common set of ingredients of concepts, evidence, ethical norms, and tools, as well as technical, social, and policy solutions. But this stellar group also have some special or some secret ingredients. And we're in for a real treat this morning, a real masterclass in leadership. Now, they might be a little bit embarrassed about being singled out in this way, but we can't let their humility prevent us from emulating their visions, their tenacity, and their belief of purpose. It is very fitting that we are highlighting inspirational leadership in rights, as rights are what all of us are entitled to legally, politically, ethically, and socially. Rights are not conditional. They're not privileges to be withheld. The UN recognizes 30 basic rights which are indivisible and do not fall into any type of hierarchy. So from a landscape point of view, all of the 30 basic human rights are relevant. Perhaps we should add a few more. Surely we all have a right to live in a world within a 2-degree limit. We all have a right to breathe air with less than 450 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and to live in a world that will not lose 20% of its biodiversity in the coming decade, and not to have more than 25% of our land degraded, or to cope with millions of landscape refugees. So without further ado, let us come to our panel and their expertise and visionary leadership. And it's my pleasure, on your behalf, to welcome to the podium Maria Flashbach, the Parliamentary State Secretary from the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Maria is Parliamentary State Secretary and has been a Member of Parliament in Germany since 2002. And she's particularly active in environmental and gender issues. And perhaps most importantly for us as well, she's one of those group of less than 5% of parliamentarians in the world who comes with a science background, because she studied veterinary medicine at university. Maria, the podium is yours.
Mr. Nazi and Mr. Simon, Directors General, Mr. Sritaran, Mayor of Bonn, lieber Herr Bürgermeister, honorable participants, ladies and gentlemen. The environment is on loan to each generation, which must then hand it on to the next. Pope Francis charges us to remember that in his encyclical letter Laudato Si. Landscapes, nature, forests, mountains and lakes are Earth's greatest treasures. They provide us humans with vitally important services. Forests produce oxygen and store carbon. They protect against soil erosion and against degeneration into steppe. They are home and habitat for 1.6 billion people. Food grows in the soil, cattle graze on the land, and water filtered through soil is purified and becomes drinkable. And the oceans store more CO2 than forests. They shelter many species of animal and plants, and they supply healthy food. This natural environment is under threat. Climate change. 2015 to 2018 were the warmest years since weather records began. Extinction. Every year, 30,000 different species of animals and plants are lost forever. And almost half of all ecosystems are under threat. Deforestation. Each year, almost 8 million hectares of forests are lost. In fact, Global Forest Watch reckons that the real figure is close to 18 million hectares. Land degradation. Each year, an area the size of Costa Rica becomes degraded. 1/3 of all the land in the world is already infertile. Meanwhile, the global population is continuing to grow, and so is the demand for food. In Africa alone, 2/3 of agricultural land is under threat. This means that the livelihoods of millions of small farmers are also in danger. And it is not just the natural environment that is under threat. There are people too, whose continuous existence is in danger. The landscapes and untouched nature that are disappearing are often home to indigenous communities or other marginalized groups who are directly impacted by their loss. Protecting their rights is also a task for our development policy. That is why I am so pleased that the Global Landscapes Forum has made the topic of rights as a central theme this year. But protection is not all that these people need. Many indigenous peoples have centuries-old knowledge about living in harmony with nature. They know that you should only take as much from nature as will grow back. They have been living the principles for sustainability for generations. We should learn from them. Investing in landscapes means investing in future. Investments in the natural environment have a long-term impact. The poorest people in society and future generations benefit from such investments. I'm therefore very pleased that we have come together today for this forum, and thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Maria, for those inspirational words, and you can see why we asked her to kick off this morning's session. Our second speaker this morning is Cornelia Richter, who is the Vice President of IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Cornelia gives strategic direction to the institution and promotes corporate approaches and solutions. She has direct oversight of the budget, the quality assurance and ethics officers. And before joining IFAD, Cornelia was the managing director at GIZ, the German Development Agency. Cornelia, the floor is yours.
State Secretary Dr. Flaxbart, Mr. Mayor Sridharan, Mr. Massey, dear participants. The drumbeat for a sustainable future is growing louder every day. And the Global Landscape Forum has turned up these volumes through its efforts to bring together 1 billion people for sustainable landscapes. I would like to thank CIFOR, the World Bank and UNEP for creating this important platform. And my particular thanks go to the German government, particularly to the Ministry for Economic Development and to the Ministry for Environment for supporting this important event. It is wonderful to see so many people coming together dedicated to a sustainable future for our planet. This year's focus on rights unites us in a conviction that inequality, injustice and discrimination must not be tolerated. A rights-based approach is fundamental to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. And it is also fundamental to my institution, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. As a United Nations agency responsible for financing agricultural development, we have human rights in our DNA. IFAD exists to end poverty and hunger where they run deepest, in the rural areas of developing countries. That is where 80% of the world's poorest people live. Particularly vulnerable are women, youth, and indigenous people. The latter account for 5% of the world's population, but represent 15% of people living in extreme poverty. To fulfill our mission and meet the 2030 agenda, IFAD is committed to empowering indigenous people and women and to investing in youth. I won't pretend that we have all the answers. We don't, and obviously we can't end hunger and poverty alone. But by working in partnership, we can scale up our efforts, amplify our impact, and avoid duplication. Only by working together can we meet the SDGs and create a world where no one is left behind. A rights-based approach requires 3 essential steps from our experience. The first is ownership at all political levels, at government level, but also at regional and local level. The second step is a participatory approach. Development is not something that is done to people, it is something that people do for themselves. And the third step is providing fair and equal access to resources. Take land, for example. When people have secure land rights, they have the confidence to invest in their property and farm sustainability. Conversely, lack of secure tenure can increase poverty, inequality, and conflict. Over the years, IFAD has introduced a range of measures to strengthen land tenure security and allow poor rural people to access natural resources. For example, in Ethiopia, we support a project that has helped more than 50% of women-headed households to obtain land certificates, contributing to a dramatic increase in crop yields. Or in Mexico, a project promoting sustainable community management of forest resources has increased women's incomes by 10%. These are the successes, but of course there are challenges. One of the biggest is climate change. Subsistence farmers living in remote areas have done little to cause climate change, but they are the ones paying the heaviest price. More frequent droughts, floods, and erratic weather and disrupted growing seasons are destroying their crops and their homes. Evidence shows that environmental outcomes are often better in indigenous communities. For example, in the Brazilian Amazonas, the deforestation rate in indigenous territories is less than 10% of forest loss in the rest of the region. Indigenous people, traditional knowledge can benefit all of us and help keep agricultural land productive for successive generations. Ladies and gentlemen, talking about a rights-based approach is a matter of justice, but also the most practical way of reducing poverty, conflict, improving nutrition, and of making the world a better place. So I wish this forum a lot of success, not only creating momentum, but also creating a very sustainable agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cornelia. So you've seen already from these first two talks what we need to do to have that inspiring leadership. Now, we're running 12 minutes behind, but listening to Maria and Cornelia, their thinking is about 10 years ahead. So when 12 minutes behind, 10 years ahead, we're not doing too bad. But let me quickly then come to our third speaker, which is Jennifer Morris. Jennifer joined Conservation International fresh out of graduate school and rose through the ranks to lead some of Conservation International's most lasting and influential investment and business engagement initiatives. These initiatives included CI's Center for Environmental Leadership in Business and the Global Conservation Fund, which helped protect nearly 200 million acres worldwide and brought hundreds of millions of dollars to conservation and communities around the world. Jennifer, the podium is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to the mayor, secretary, to everyone who's here today and all the supporters of this forum. So there's a quote I really like on leadership, and it goes like this. I learned to always take on things I've never done before, because growth and comfort cannot coexist. This is a quote by Jenny Rometty. She is the CEO and chairman of IBM, the first female CEO of this company, of a major corporation. And why I raise this quote with you is because I think this same ethos needs to be applied to the environmental movement. We need to get a little bit uncomfortable. Now, we're all optimists in this room, despite these pessimistic statistics. You are all here because you believe in change. You believe that nature and humans can live together forever in harmony without undermining our planet. But as we know, science tells us we don't have a lot of time. The clock is ticking. The last IPCC report basically put us all on a clock, that we have around 12 years, just over a decade, to avoid the worst catastrophic events of climate change. But yet the role of nature and the critical role of Indigenous people is still massively undervalued. If we took all of the passenger cars and vehicles off the road tomorrow, we would still not hit our goals under Paris because of unsustainable land use. To put it another way, if deforestation were a country, it would be the third largest emitter after the US and China. That's the situation we are in, and that's why we are all here. We need radical collaboration to create a future that puts nature and Indigenous communities first. And I have to be honest with you, we, the environmental community, we're not so great at radical collaboration. Perhaps it's because it forces us out of our comfort zones. It forces us to put our own egos aside, the own objectives of our individual organizations aside, and focus not just on success for ourselves or our organization, but really the real goal which is a planet that we can all be proud of to leave for our children. None of us here wants to live wasted lives. Lives we have spent almost getting it right, almost avoiding the worst impacts of climate change. I don't know about you, but I'm not satisfied with almost. I don't want to leave my 11-year-old daughter a world of almost. So to avoid this, we must seek out, highlight, and replicate radical collaboration. But we do have some examples. One of my favorites is a collaboration between NASA scientists and indigenous people in Ecuador and Peru. They're working together to measure the treasure of indigenous lands and partner with indigenous people to help protect those lands. Now, we heard earlier that tropical forests controlled by indigenous people store an estimated 25% of the world's potential carbon emissions and 80% of the world's biodiversity. But these territories are vast and are under massive threats from the outside, from illegal mining, from logging, and many other activities. And often these areas are so large that it's difficult to understand what's happening and track the trends and help to protect them. So recently, a team of partners from Conservation International and NASA partner with local indigenous communities to explore how technology and Earth observation systems can help partner with indigenous communities to better steward and protect these lands in Peru and Ecuador, using both modern and traditional techniques together. This type of partnership only adds to the incredible depths of indigenous knowledge already there. So bringing rocket scientists together with indigenous people to protect forests will take us in new directions. This is just one example of radical collaboration in leadership that we need. This partnership highlights another critical point and why we're all here today. We need to lift up the non-traditional leader. We must highlight, shout about, and embrace leadership in all forms, from indigenous leaders to youth activists to many others, to the true superheroes of our movement, the environmental defenders around the world who are risking their lives every single day for us and for our planet. But why do we often not hear about these leaders until they have become martyrs for this cause? Should we not all be doing more in the era of radical transparency in social media to lift up these voices? The environmental problems we face are requiring leadership from all corners, from school walkouts to massive protests to individuals pushing aside fear because they know they must speak out. That is leadership. We all must be leaders in our own way to solve the greatest challenges of our generation. But this will require doing things we've never done, getting outside of our comfort zone, because truly growth and comfort cannot coexist if we are to succeed. So we cannot make small plans, but we also cannot make big plans on our own if we're truly to succeed. We have to work in radical collaboration. So thank you to the GLF family for bringing us all here together, and I look forward to today's proceedings. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer, for our third inspiring leadership talk this morning. So it's my pleasure now to invite Desmond Alumina from the Green Africa Youth Organization, the co-founder of that. Desmond is a passionate advocate for environmental conservation, climate awareness, mitigation, and youth empowerment. He grew up in the Savannah region of northern Ghana, and Desmond witnessed himself the significant seasonal changes in his surrounding landscape and the negative effect that had on crops, animals, and people's livelihoods. And he came to the conclusion that socioeconomic development is directly linked and interconnected with environmental conservation and the necessary education and advocacy to support that. Dennis, the podium is yours.
speaking about inspirational leadership. I think it's important for me to first of all talk a little about what inspirational leadership is not. And I think inspirational leadership is not when we sit and conveniently discuss the future and totally ignore what is happening in the present. I think it is not inspirational leadership when your vision is to control the world rather than to save it. And I think inspirational leadership is not when people in power sign the agreement and yet avoid the responsibility to take action now. My name is Desmond Alumina. I work with the Green Africa Youth Organization, as Mr. Simon introduced. But I'm here on behalf of all the inspirational young leaders across the globe. 5 years ago, we had a dream. We dreamt of a society where people's job was to solve environmental challenges and to create a healthier planet. This was our dream, and it was our vision. I think as an inspirational leader, you need to have a clear vision that every action that you take, even on a little piece of the landscape, has a huge impact on the whole system. Just like how cutting down a small area of mangroves could lead to flooding, could lead to displacement of communities, could lead to forced migration, and all the consequences that come with that. When it came to implementing our vision, we knew that we needed to engage women and youth as agents of change, because they are at the center of all the challenges that we talk about. And today, my organization trains women and youth to generate income from items that would have otherwise been thrown away. Today, whether it is about creating jobs from urban waste management, or it is about rural innovation, we bring hope, we bring collaboration, and we bring inspirations. And I must add that we are not alone. Across the globe, there are so many inspirational young leaders who are also strengthening collaborations, creating mutual trust, and redefining the struggle for a safe, sustainable, and orderly planet. Just think of Ala Salah, a 22-year-old Sudanese lady who's bringing hope to her country. She's inspiring and leading the citizens to stand against political oppressions. And let's think of the 29-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman in the US who is proposing the Green New Deal. And let's think of the very closest to us in terms of sustainability, climate change. 16-year-old Greta Thunberg from Sweden, whose call for climate action now is inspiring people across the globe. Alexandria, Greta, and Allah are only a few among the many individuals who have risen beyond the oppressions and the lack of recognition that young people often face. Their leadership is not only inspiring the present generation, but it is creating a vision that is shared by millions across the globe. I think inspirational leadership does not need popularity. Inspirational leadership does not need approval. And inspirational leadership, you do not wait for power. So, my young friends, your inexperience and financial challenges should not be a limitation to the inherent power that you possess. And it definitely should not be a limitation for you to seize the moment and shape this world. Act today. Let's act now. And to everyone in this room, please, inspirational leadership is the ability to give young people the space to act without feeling insecure. So do what it takes to share your experience, your vision, your ideas, and your hopes. I invite you all to be bold, break the silos, change the narrative, and share your vision. Because this is the way to be an inspirational leader. And is the sure way for your legacy to live on, even when you are long gone. Thank you.
Wow, Desmond, how do you fix a wise, and philosophical head on such young shoulders? It's really, really inspirational. Fantastic. Well done. So in 20 years' time, everyone in this room can say, I remember the first time I heard Desmond, that world leader. It was in Bonn at this. Really, I think Desmond deserves a second round of applause. And so we've saved one of our best until last, Victoria Tauli Corpus, the UN Special Rapporteur on Rights for Indigenous Peoples. Victoria was appointed the Special Rapporteur on Rights of Indigenous Peoples by the Human Rights Council in 2014. And in the fulfillment of her mandate, she conducts fact-finding missions and reports on the human rights situation in specific countries. She addresses cases of alleged violations of the rights of Indigenous peoples through communications with governments and others, and promotes good practices to implement international standards concerning the rights of Indigenous peoples, as well as conducting thematic studies on topics of special importance to the promotion and protection of rights. She herself is an Indigenous leader of the Kankaya Igorot people of the Cordillera region in the Philippines. Victoria, it's an absolute delight to welcome you to the podium.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank the Mayor of Bonn for welcoming us and the Global Landscapes Forum Secretariat and C4 for inviting me to this event. As we have seen in Alec Baldwin's presentation, Indigenous peoples and local communities are the best guardians of the forests, biodiversity hotspots, and landscapes and seascapes we all depend on. Research shows that lands managed by Indigenous peoples with secure rights experience lower rates of deforestation, store more carbon, hold more biodiversity, and benefit more people than other lands, including government-protected areas. Recognition of Indigenous rights and community rights directly contributes to, first, carbon storage. Indigenous peoples and local communities hold nearly 300 billion metric tons of carbon, equivalent to 33% of global energy emissions in 2017. They manage at least 22% of the total carbon found in tropical and subtropical forests. Second, the livelihoods of nearly a third of the world's poorest, generating over 80% of the food consumed in the developing world. Third, reduce risks of conflict, violence, and land grabs. And fourth, ecosystem services worth billions in terms of benefits, ranging from 54 billion in Bolivia to 1 trillion in Brazil, while avoiding the release of 40 to 60 metric tons of carbon a year from deforestation. The cost is less than 1% of the total benefits. Recognizing the rights is therefore critical to meeting the critical aims of the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, global forest restoration, and biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, and protecting 30% of the earth by 2030. Yet, while Indigenous peoples and local communities directly manage over 50% of the world's lands, they only have legal ownership rights to only 10%. And this gap leaves lands vulnerable to threats from agro-industrial production, destructive mining and logging practices, and large-scale infrastructure development. It also drives violence and criminalization. Over 200 land rights and environmental defenders were killed in 2017. Rights of Indigenous peoples, local communities, and Indigenous women in particular are also the most vulnerable to climate change because they often live in remote areas and rely directly on traditional and threatened resources. Therefore, scaling up recognition of Indigenous peoples and local communities' land rights is actually an achievable goal. The recognition of community forest rights increased by 40% in the last 15 years. We can more than double progress of existing legislation if existing legislations are implemented in just 4 countries: Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Indonesia, and India, benefiting 200 million people. Closing the gap in rights recognition for Indigenous peoples represents the world's single greatest opportunity in terms of land covered, number of people affected, and conflict resolution to advance global climate, biodiversity, and sustainable development goals. The Indigenous peoples major group is leading the creation of a gold standard to ensure that conservation and restoration efforts respect rights and embrace the solution offered by the world's Indigenous peoples and local communities. I myself, together with other Indigenous peoples, are launching a global campaign to combat criminalization and violence and impunity that so many land rights defenders suffer from. Finally, we call on governments, the international community, and the private sector to do the following. First, adopt the gold standard on rights-based approaches to conservation and restoration. Second, significantly scale up recognition of land and forest rights of indigenous peoples and implement the international, regional, and national norms and standards that protect these rights. Third, secure free prior informed consent of indigenous peoples, especially including indigenous women. Fourth, prioritize bilateral, multilateral, and private investments in indigenous and community-led climate and development initiatives. Fifth, end criminalization and persecution of indigenous peoples and local communities. Support campaigns that protect indigenous people's rights. Six, invest in indigenous and community livelihoods and economies. And finally, expand indigenous peoples' own governance over their territories and resources. I'd like to end with this because in my mandate as the Special Rapporteur, the most inspiring thing that I have seen are the indigenous peoples who have self-asserted their right to govern and manage their territories. And I have definitely seen that their forests are better protected, their seascapes as well, and the implementation of a landscapes-based approach is really seen very much in practice. So I congratulate indigenous peoples who have gone into that track, and I believe that it's important to support their efforts. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Victoria. Really capped it off nicely, that set of 5 presentations. So now we come to a little bit interactive session where I'm going to ask some questions to our panelists to probe a bit more about their visionary leadership styles. So just to remind you, if you haven't yet, please submit your words to Slido, sli.do, that single quality that you feel represented. And here we have here. If your word is not up there or it's underrepresented, please make sure that you submit that. For those of you who have the simultaneous translation, channel 1 is English, channel 2 is French, channel 3 is German, and channel 4 is Common Sense. So can everyone please turn to channel 4 as we listen to the responses now from our panelists. And I'm going to go first to Maria. Maria, you spoke very eloquently about the priority for rights with the German government, and particularly for the ministry that you're engaged in. But can you tell us specifically what role the topic of rights plays in the work of BMZ?
I think in order to preserve nature, we need to think about policy making to safeguard people's rights. And rights are in the heart of this session here of the GLF in Bonn, and rights are also in the heart of the work of my ministry of the BMZ. The rights I'm talking about are the rights to make use of natural resources, the rights of freedom of expression, the right to participation and inclusion. Intimidation or even violence towards indigenous communities, very often motivated by economic reasons, are quite simple not acceptable. At the Global Soil Week in Nairobi, the participants also agreed that access to land, good governance at local level, responsible land policies are key factors. And with our One World No Hunger initiative, we are promoting land rights and supporting the efforts of local smallholders and indigenous groups to organize themselves. And we recognize that good rural governance is necessary, and we are actively engaged in efforts to secure land rights of 450,000 people. That's very concrete facts. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Maria. So, coming to Cornelia, you spoke very eloquently about some amazing examples, and for those of you who don't know IFAD, please go online. Yes, they are a UN agency, internet organization, but they punch way above their weight in terms of the development, in terms of the change that they stimulate in so many countries around the world. So specifically to you, Cornelia, how does the theme of rights relate to your style and motivation as a leader within IFAD?
Well, that's a very intriguing question for myself, and every day I'm struggling with this question, I have to admit, because we feel, first of all, we feel obliged to pave the way and to make sure that our beneficiaries are really reaping the fruits of all the investments in the rural sector. And as a manager in an international organization, you could say you're far ahead. You don't have this immediate impact, but definitely you can have by empowering your own people in our institution, and that's what we've done. We've also decentralized our activities tremendously because we've learned we have to come as close as possible also to our beneficiaries, because that's where the real work is happening based on the strategies and based on the finances which are made available. And in this regard, I think it is key that we exercise a very inclusive style of leadership. There are so many intriguing words here in front of me and all these nice buzzwords, but for me, if I reflect my own style of leadership, I have to ensure that, particularly in international organization, that leadership is inclusive, that I have a lot of respect and that I listen to the different perspectives. Nowadays, I can't think of a single problem which you can approach or which you can solve only from one perspective. So we are benefiting enormously in the international organizations, but this also holds true for other organizations I've served in, from different perspectives. Enabling, at least I try. I hope my people are saying the same from me. I try to listen. I try to create an environment of trust, which is very important to me. And I try to empower people that they can come up with their own opinions. And with regard to IFAD's work in the field, it is reflected in a very participatory approach that we really involve the different groups, the farmers. And there is one example I particularly like, which boils down to ensuring that rights, even at the household level, between men and women, are better respected. We're applying a kind of household approach. When we start a project, we also involve the family, and we try to build on their vision. What do you like to change in your life? The wife, the husband, even the children. They are coming up sometimes with painted visions, and this is the starting point also for planning. And this also gives us some guidance, and then we have to link it up also to government's vision for the country. And I think that's where we need also inspirational activists in the different groups, also in the countries. So I'm also pretty much aware that as a manager, you depend very much, first of all, on your staff. There is a mutual dependency, but you also depend very much on people like Desmond and all the other activists here in the room who bring the fire, the ideas, and the necessities to build up this kind of empowerment. So.
Great, thanks very much, Cornelia. I told you this was a humble group because Cornelia reminded us that leadership is not about one person. It is about being inclusive and being that servant leadership. Coming to Jennifer. Jennifer, you told us that almost is not good enough for you. And as we look at losses of biodiversity and issues of climate change, you know, that we don't need that binary choice between Al Gore and almost. So for you, what are those emerging key values and principles in leadership that will help us get to that sweet goal of managing our landscapes with a more rights-based approach?
Thank you for the question. So one of the things I try to do as a leader is really to listen. And I think that goes from my teams to all of the beneficiaries in the 27 countries and really partners that we work with. If we're not listening, if we're just waiting to speak, we don't hear. And we have to really be quiet and thoughtful as leaders of large institutions and try to get alternative opinions in the room. The worst thing that I think for kind of not being able to change is what we call groupthink, of having the same people who think the same way in the same room saying the same things. And then we don't have radical transformation. So getting out of our comfort zones, as I mentioned, and really sitting and listening and thinking. That's been core to Conservation International's approach from the beginning, is really how do we partner with people who are on the front lines of conservation to give them the rights, the access to resources, to protect their own, not just lands and seas, but also cultural heritage. And that for us is really critical. So one of the things that we have done in partnership with many others is something called the Dedicated Grant Mechanism for Indigenous people and local communities. And that provides resources for Indigenous organizations to actually have their own agency, to have rights, to lobby their governments and local communities for change, and really to have a global learning network. And I'd say that, one example of success there has been in Peru, where we've been able to help over 150 communities get land tenure. The goal is over 300 communities will have actual land tenure in the next few years. But in my mind, and something Vicky said I think is really important, which is it's not only land tenure that's critical, it's also having the ability to manage and protect those lands. So it's having the economic resources to grow crops, to create alternative enterprises, et cetera, tourism, whatever is needed in a locally, culturally appropriate fashion, so that people have the resources to monitor and protect those lands that they now own. So that's really important.
Great. Thanks very much, Jennifer. Round of applause. Certainly. To our Socratic philosopher, Desmond. One key thing you said in your introduction, Desmond, was that leadership does not equate to power. Okay? An amazing statement from a young person. But could we also ask you how inclusion and diversity show and come through styles of leadership and the needs of business today?
I think much of my response would have to do with my work, and I can say that, like Cornelia mentioned, there's no one straight way to one-stance solution to these problems. And to be inclusive, how we got to this level has been that at the beginning we were just doing a lot of different activities, and then after 2 years, when you try to validate, we realized that it was a failure. And that was because we were not involving the necessary networks of people that we are supposed to work with. And then it was also because there was no clear vision of including whosoever have the ability to help you create the impact. For instance, we have several youth networks that used to work in silos, and part of it was because people want to take credit for their initiatives and all that. But we started reaching out and organizing biennial meetups called the Power Shift. And during these programs, we talk to people the reason why we need to stand together, the reason why we need to be able to act as one and set our priorities right. So I think in today's setup, leadership should be more of future thinking. Today's solution might be laudable, but if it is limited to one set of people, if you don't include the people who will have energy in the next 2, 3 to 5 years, your dream might die.
Great, thanks very much, Desmond. And so, Victoria, you've been leading for a very long time, and you've been visionary for a very long time. Can you share with us how you've managed to bring that leadership and quality to really amplify the effects of rights and the theme, and your own particular style to that? That's what the audience and those online want to hear from you. You're the expert. You're the UN Rapporteur on human rights. Share with us some of your magic.
Well, I think that it's, I became an activist because there was a big dam project in my region which was being funded by the bank and under a dictatorship. So I think that's where I learned a lot of the ropes of the links between local, national, and global. And that's when I got involved with the drafting of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and where I met a lot of indigenous leaders from all parts of the world, and got that inspiration that indeed, as a peoples, we do have something to contribute. We are contributing something, and we need to beef up our capacity to do that, but also to protect ourselves. And that, I think, is what's pushing me to continue doing the work. In my mandate as the rapporteur, it's a very fulfilling mandate because you go to the level of the communities, you talk to the people, you're like thousands of people, and then you meet the governments and you tell the governments exactly what you have heard. And even if they deny it, we say, but I saw it, I talked to them, I went to their community, and there are these people who are in jail simply because they are protecting the rights to not to have your river dammed against oil expansion in the Amazon, for instance. And so, you have that, you have the strength of the people's desire to save their lands. And that's the strength that gives me the inspiration to continue entering into dialogue with the government and the private sector. And it's really the indigenous people's energy and desire to contribute in making this a better world that inspires me all the time.
Great, thanks, Victoria. Now, the problem with social media is you only get a few characters to say something. And it is correct. Victoria did say, we don't want another dam project from outside. But that's dam, D-A-M, not D-A-M-N, yeah? So we don't want another dam project, we don't want another damned project from outside. We are running out of time. However, I think given the role that Germany has helped in showing leadership to us all, I'd like to perhaps come to Maria for a closing question. And that would be, BMZ has done a lot to engage with communities, to engage with governments, to understand their needs. And how much of what BMZ is doing is protecting natural habitats? How much of what is BMZ doing responding to that demand, restoring forests and soils and landscapes?
I think what we really have to do is to establish incentives. So let me speak about this RED mechanism. This is, I think, a very, very good example for an incentive. Countries with large area of forests are rewarded via RED for preserving their forests. We are supporting RED since 10 years. Let me tell about AFR 100 initiative, which is concerned with restoring degraded landscapes in Africa, with more than 50 partners which have joined the initiative meanwhile. And I think this is another very, very good example. Or another example is the Global Commission for Adaptation, which is co-chaired by Ban Ki-moon. Gerd Müller, our minister, is one of the 29 commissioners, and he focuses on climate-resilient agriculture, food security, and rural development. We think that one of the most powerful incentives is the protection through use, where people depend on nature for their livelihoods. They have an interest in ensuring that it's preserved and protected. So protecting nature and making economic use of the natural environment are not mutually exclusive, but we are convinced that they belong together. So our efforts in this context are fighting corruption, creating fair conditions, and ensuring the sustainability of forest products. We are lobbying for deforestation-free supply chains. For example, our goal is that only products which have been produced without chopping down the rainforest should be allowed into Europe, but it's still a way to go to achieve this.
Great. Thanks very much to Maria. So could we have the, stay seated please, could we have the Slido questions up? The answers to the Slido question up on the main screen for people to see? Fantastic. Look at that. Is your word there? It looks like only 202 people have responded. So either you don't have a smartphone, or you do have one and you don't know how to use it. It is www.sli.do. Please make sure, because you will only be served lunch if you've answered this question. But look at the words up there. Fantastic set of words. And as we ask the panel to leave the stage, I'm going to ask each of them which is their favorite word, or not their favorite, but one of their favorite words. You can see it on the TV screens in front of you, which would be one of your words that help describe that key quality that is needed in leadership and vision. Starting with Maria.
It's courage.
Which one? Which word? Courage.
It's courage.
Courage, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Cornelia?
It's empowerment.
Great. Jennifer?
Just one. Listening and collaboration.
Listening stroke collaboration. Thanks. Desmond?
I'll go with action.
Action on the ground. And Victoria?
I go with compassion and empathy.
Wow. And what a powerful way to end the session. "800 people in the room, 8,000 people online, reaching 800,000 in social media. Be that difference." We've had amazing visionary leadership from this group of 5 people. If you don't know where we're going, any road will take us there. And they've helped chart the vision on how rights can be so much more as part of our landscape initiative. And make sure you are championing rights in your work. And look at the documents you're releasing. We used to look at a document and say, oh, that's gender blind. You haven't mentioned gender at all. Look at your documents. Are they rights blind? Have a second look and make sure that we're putting rights and the issue of rights on the front page every single time, so that it won't just be about recognition, but it will also lead to reparation and restoration of our landscapes. Thank you very much for listening, and a warm, warm round of applause for our 5 wonderful panelists.
Thanks a lot.